Okay, welcome everybody to the third in the series on classified evaluations. So we've gone through a lot of material the last two sessions. In this session, we purposely did not have as much material. And in fact, most of the material we have basically encourages discussion. And so we'll be asking questions. We'll be asking you to ask questions as well. And hopefully we'll be able to answer many more questions today than we were in other sessions. But it's really designed to get everyone's participation this time around. So, and my name is Michael Hudson. I'm the Assistant Director HR, temporary. And Dr. Trayshawn Hall Baker is with us as well. So Trayshawn, did you want to give a holler before we get started?
Just want to say good morning and thank you all for joining us again. This is the final session, as Michael said, and we hope that you join us for future sessions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Trayshawn. So as we begin, some other people may be trickling in, but we'll go ahead and begin because I like to award people who come on time, and certainly they'll be able to ask questions when they have them. So, okay, I'm pushing. Okay, I have to press that button. So we started with a concept of giving management training in many different areas before the shut-in period began. And we were looking at 3-hour sessions for each of these areas. So we've done evaluation. Evaluation is what we would have done in a 3-hour session, probably at Bundy. But obviously we couldn't do that. So we divided it up into 3 1-hour sessions to make it a little easier because it's kind of hard to sit for a Zoom session for 3 hours. And so we want to do the same with progressive intervention. And so that has been arranged. That will be again next week, same time, same place, Zoom. And that will be on the 26th of May, the 2nd of June, and the 9th of June. So please join us next Tuesday, a week from today at 11 o'clock. Please sign up and be a part of progressive intervention training. So we want to mention that performance evaluations are part of a bigger process, performance management. And I think we have mentioned already that performance management begins when? It begins when you first meet that person, letting them know the expectations. If you have for example, an interview, and there are certain things that are very important to you, why not mention it at the interview and let potential employees know what your expectations are. And then first day on the job, orientation, let them know the expectations then, have staff meetings, have ongoing acknowledgement and guiding of employees. And so it's an ongoing process. Performance appraisals is just part of that performance management process, giving that guidance, giving the reassurance when employees are doing well, and giving them corrective suggestions and implementing procedures to correct performance and conduct that is below our standards. And the last step is what we'll talk about next week, starting next week, progressive intervention, including discipline. So progressive intervention is where you see there's a concern and you're in the correction mode. The word discipline specifically refers to when you're taking something away from the employee, such as either a forced transfer, a demotion, dismissal, or suspension. And that's still in the correction mode until you get to dismissal. The idea is that if after all the great things we've done, the person doesn't listen, hopefully they will pay attention with the suspension. And after we assess it every time, and at some point we say, this person is not going to get it. And then we go to dismissal. So everything up till then, including this performance appraisals we're talking about for these 3 weeks, is before we get into the area of discipline. It's guidance. It's the concept of why really punish a person when you don't have to, because discipline is not about punishment. It's about helping people meet our expectations. Okay. And as we go along, please go ahead and ask questions. I guess the best way is to let Cyrus or Trayshawn know through the chat function or physically raise your hand. I cannot see everyone here, so I will ask them to let us know. Okay. So we're going to be talking about classified evaluations. They're going to be using the CSEA contract. Once again, I urge everyone to have a copy of this, because if you call and ask me a question, I try to have a copy in my hand, because there may be a time where I may say the word must, but it really should have been may, and there's a big difference. So be sure to be guided by the contract and of course, any other regs, rules and regulations that apply. Okay, so we talked last week about the actual form. So we wanted to make sure that everybody is comfortable with the standards we're using in the areas of attendance and work schedule and all of these areas. And in fact, what I'm going to ask as we go along is if people could give examples of the actual writing you would say. In a classroom setting, we might actually have everyone, we would stop the session and allow people to write things down in breakout sessions. It's not as practical in a Zoom session. So we'll just all work on these together. So before we go into specific wording in a contract, in an evaluation, we want to make sure that when we're saying something, it's something that's clear all the way around. I think as human beings, I think we're all emotional animals. So something happens and it's hard not to react in an emotional way. If someone hurts your feelings or treats you in a way where that you feel is improper, it's hard just to say, you know what you did? You spent 30 seconds and here's the word you used, and here's what happened. We're more than likely to say, you're a terrible person, I'm really angry at you, and use words that show our feelings. When we're documenting conduct and performance in a performance evaluation, we need to leave the emotions behind, because the words we use that are emotion-based have different meanings to different persons. So we try to go to facts. I try to avoid using adjectives, very late, rather late, kind of late. I know I once was involved in progressive discipline with not at this place, not here, but at another place where I worked. It was a police dispatcher who was coming to work 2 or 3 minutes late. So someone calls 911, and so the person who was supposed to be off, let's say at 8 o'clock, had to stay till 8:10. So their being a little late was very late to them, because that meant, overtime for that person. You could not leave that phone open for even 30 seconds. And so it's easier to say the person was 5 minutes late, as opposed to saying very late or kind of late. So these are things we want to do. So when we look at conduct, you see this guy here yelling at the computer, obviously someone who needs some intervention. So if we say someone was in my face, you got in my face, what does that mean? Anybody want to volunteer? And I've heard people say, how close is the person to you? They were in my face. Anybody want to volunteer what that really means?
Violating their space or
being loud.
Okay.
I think in my
A
face
little
could
more
also,
specific.
I think in my face could also mean it's threatening.
Okay. So I'm getting differences of opinion on how that term can be used, and you're all correct. And I think it's making the point of why I would avoid a term like in my face in an actual evaluation, because everybody's going to hear it a little different. When I hear of in your face, I think of someone standing too close to me. But what does too close mean? And I've had, interviewing witnesses when I'm doing hearings, I would say, in your face, how far were they? Were they arm's distance? 2 arm lengths is about 6 feet. A yard is supposed to be the arm length. Is someone close enough where if you had a fist between you and them, there's that much space? Is it across the room? So it's better to say they were about a yard away, about 3 feet away, versus saying in my face, or whatever it is, a hand length, whatever it is. How about ignore students? What does that mean? Anybody?
Not paying attention.
Okay. And could you be more specific how you would measure that?
Well, if you're not acknowledging a student that wants to be acknowledged, basically.
Okay. So you could say on several occasions there were times students needed to be acknowledged or wanted to be acknowledged and they weren't acknowledged, right? So that's how I would say that's really good. What about bad attitude? Bad attitude. I've heard this. People have said, write him up, he has a bad attitude. Okay.
Insubordination?
Insubordination could be an example. Very much so. I think maybe everyone is catching the problem with this term already, right? Because insubordination is a good example, but there are other things that may constitute bad attitude. So instead of, someone else wanted to add something, I heard another voice. Go ahead.
Yeah, Michael, it's Matthew. One thing I can share is from past experiences. We had at my previous place, we had a member of the facilities team who it seemed like he was always yelling at people.
Okay.
But he actually had some hearing challenges. So at first, when I first met him, I thought he was just kind of angry all the time.
Okay.
But it was not the case. So just wanted to share that.
Okay. So we've already have 2 examples. So if someone has if someone is insubordinate, and we can define that. Insubordination, basically you need a director from a supervisor. You need a refusal to perform whatever it is that supervisor, and then the person actually not performing the duty. So in other words, if the supervisor says, I want you to do such and such, and the person walks away, and there's a possibility they didn't hear it, you may not have insubordination. There are degrees of this. I don't want to speak in absolutes. But if the person did say, I'm not doing it, and they walk away and they never do it, that definitely that's a textbook of insubordination. If they say, I'm not doing it, but they still do it, I would say it's not insubordination, but it's still rude conduct. So it's good, but if we have that whole scenario, instead of just saying they exhibited bad attitude, if we say, the supervisor asked them what to do something, and they yelled back, I'm not doing it, but they did it anyway, we still can put everything in context. So insubordination was one, yelling loud. And I would ask when someone tells me, oh, the person was yelling, I would say, so you hear the level of my voice. Am I loud? No, I would call you medium. It was louder than your voice. And so that gives me an idea, because there are people that would prefer that you talk what I would call softly, where I can barely hear it, but other persons would say, well, that's exactly how loud it should be. So some way of comparing it. So sarcastic is kind of along the line of bad attitude. It's if you can give examples, it's best if we just say the person was sarcastic versus giving examples of what they actually said. Oh, so you want me to help you now when you didn't before? That's a little sarcastic, right? How about rude? How can we define rude? Any volunteers?
Lack of respect.
Okay, how can we find lack of respect?
Ignoring someone.
Okay, that's a good one. Okay. So when they walked in the room or they came to the counter and they didn't serve a student who was waiting. Right, so that's a good example. Ignoring someone is a good example. So rude is one of those other words that if we went around the room or the Zoom room, we would all have a little bit different definition. How about threatening?
They get in your personal space.
Okay. So I would say yes, but I would define the personal space. I would say the person closely approached within, once again, using maybe the arm as a half arm's length, that's within a foot away. And quickly, if someone runs up to you and gets 2 feet away from you, that I would say definitely closing your in on your personal space. So I would describe all of those single activities that led to them getting in your personal space. Also, that would be a point where it may be beneficial as well. Let's say there are 2 employees who are arguing, and that would be a person where you say, how did you feel after that person did that? And you say, I felt threatened. The only caveat is there are people who will be yelled at. Someone will yell, I don't want to do that, or I don't like you, or whatever it is, and they'll say that was threatening. So that's a word that, once again, is a little hard to define. To me, threatening would be when I communicate to someone that I will do some type of bodily harm to them. So that's a text, what I would call a textbook version. I'm gonna beat you up. Let's step outside. I'll see you after work, and my buddies are here. I would say those are threats, but not where someone is just yelling, hey, you got to help me, or you got to help me. That's not threatening. You may feel threatened, but and the clearer we are in describing the conduct, the more successful we'll be, because we can say specifically what happened. Angry, how would we describe that, or what are the elements of being angry? Anyone?
Yelling,
Yelling. Okay, that would be
or maybe hitting a wall or something.
okay. What is this gentleman? Not a gentleman, but this guy here in the picture doing?
Screaming at the monitor.
Okay, so yelling, meaning the loud voice. His facial expressions, we could describe that as, what do you call that? Tightening the face, opening his mouth. He's leaning in, pretend the computer's another person. If you're leaning into someone, that would be described as well. I also ask, what about their hands? If someone has their fist, they're balling their fist, even if it's to their side, that's something that's important. Okay, so I'm gonna go to the next slide. It has some of the suggestions I came up with. I just wanted to see if we were all kind of on the same page. Tone of voice, volume of voice, word choice. So if someone says, I'm so angry, I could go home and pound on the wall, right? Versus I'm so angry I could, and then they use an expletive, right? I could do blah blah blah, and they're using expletives. So word choice is important. It's okay if someone gets angry. It's not okay if they express it in an offensive way. And maybe angry is not quite the word I'm looking for, but if someone is not happy with the situation, we need to be able to describe what's actionable. So there's some things that are not actionable. In other words, I really want all my employees to enjoy being at work, and I say something to one employee, they look a little annoyed maybe, but maybe they sigh, and then they turn around and smile and say, okay, I'll take care of it, Michael, and then they do it. I'm going to say that's probably not actionable unless it's in front of students. But if someone they use foul language, when I ask them to do something, that would be totally different. So word choice, body language is a good one. Are they tensing up? I know when people get angry, they tend to ball their fist. They clench their, they make that facial expressions. It's good to look at that. How their posture, all of that. Delay in action. I ask someone to do something. Can you take care of that? And I might say they have a bad attitude, but why? It's because I told the person in the morning it's something they could have done very quickly, and they waited till 2 in the afternoon to do it. So the delay of action. So you could say that. And I told someone that it was important they do it right away, and they waited until 5 hours later to do it. Gestures, obviously, if someone is flipping the bird, and I won't demonstrate any offensive gestures here, but offensive gestures, obviously that's a conduct issue. Facial language, and I think that personal space was one that you all came up with first, so that's in here as well. Any questions on describing conduct? So just to kind of summarize, I'm taking some of the words we're comfortable using on a everyday, such as angry and threatening, and asking us all to describe the specific behavior we're seeing. And then that way it doesn't have to be interpreted, because we're all going to have a different level of concern. I did a employee discipline situation where one person was threatening another, and I'm going to put that in air quotes because that's why I was called out. And there was a Navy SEAL who was watching the whole thing. So it's a room full of people. One person threatened the other one. I asked, what was the threatening thing? He cursed at me, balled his fist, yelled at me, and I was afraid, and everyone in the room was afraid. So I talked to some of the other people. I talked to the Navy SEAL, and I said, were you afraid? He said, no. I said, why? He says, because in my training, I could deal with it very quickly, and I don't deal with it unless I really have to. In other words, what he meant, he could cause someone great bodily harm if he had to, but he didn't intervene. So everyone had a different level of fear. And in this Navy SEAL's case, it was because he knew how to defend himself. He knew if it got to the point where the person, instead of yelling and cursing, was physically assaulting the other person, then he would have intervened.
So
But we all have a different level. Yes, Tricia?
If I could just add something to this section in summary, what we're trying to communicate is sometimes it's based on perception and how one may receive another's action. So in other words, what I may perceive as a threat, someone else may not perceive as a threat. And so you do want to kind of put it in the realm of what would a reasonable person say? What would a reasonable person think? If I take myself out of this situation with this person whom I have a specific relationship with, how would the comment or gesture be taken? So that's why it's really good when you come up against a certain tone of voice or, a set of words or phrases towards you that you feel may be threatened. You want to take that to someone else, perhaps someone in HR or another trusted manager, to kind of help you figure out, would a reasonable person believe that this was a threat, or would a reasonable person believe that this was a tone that was rude or discourteous? And it would kind of help you make a decision. And then even if it isn't rude or discourteous, or let's say it's aggressive or it falls somewhere else, there are other ways to frame the behavior or conduct. So it's good to kind of talk to someone else about it. So I just wanted to say, to put all of this in summary, so we wouldn't run out of time too, because now we're almost halfway through.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. That's a good point. Good points. Thanks, Tricia. So let's go on. And you're right, we need to not spend too much time in each area, because we want to give you an opportunity to ask questions and go through the other material. Let's do this very quickly. Someone doesn't care about finishing work, and this is a comment I may have seen on an evaluation. Once again, examples, when was the work given? How long did it take? Was it ever completed? That type of thing. Lazy, that same kind of thing, giving specific behavior that you saw. Late the time, how well was the work done? Does work when he or she wants to do work, ignore students, that's one we brought up. Cavalier is similar and doesn't pay attention to work. So these are things we want to avoid using these generalized phrases and use specifics. Okay. Any questions before we move on to the next area? Okay. We have an exercise here. I think we talked about these areas. So this is really designed to prompt us to talk about all these different areas that we have. So we're going to move into the evaluation standards. So there are 18 standards here. I want everyone to just kind of go down the list. I don't want to read them out loud. But if you see any area that you want defined or talked about, please let me know. We're going to highlight a few we feel that will benefit the most people, ones that we've run across. But if there is an area where you're saying, oh, Michael and Trayshawn didn't cover this area, please let me know. But we're going to talk about the standards now. So first of all, let's talk about attendance. So as you know, if you go to the right of your screen, in attendance, you can rate some rather as below standards, meets standards, or exceeds standards. So first of all, this first example where someone has missed 3 days of work for bereavement leave, but has been present at work every other day. How would you rate that person on attendance? They've only missed for bereavement. How many people would rate them exceeds? How many people would rate them meets?
Meets.
Okay. All right. Should you penalize them for taking bereavement leave? Okay.
No.
No.
So the takeaway here is you don't penalize for bereavement leave. I'm not going to try to fine tune whether this should be specifically exceed standards or meet standards. The main thing is consistency among all of your employees. I would probably rate exceeds on this, but certainly a lot of people do take the position when you walk in the door, you're at meets, and you have to kind of take yourself to exceeds or bring yourself down below that. But certainly at least the meets in this case. Second example, and this is well written out. Would you agree? Would you say that it's clear when this person was off from work? It's not just they missed a lot of work. And I probably would not reference this in the actual evaluation. I wouldn't write down, this is not what I'm writing down, this is how it's presented to you. So I wouldn't indicate they missed 3 days of work. I would, just give them the rating, maybe a general comment about their attendance. So the second one is employee has taken off for 4 weeks for FMLA leave and has taken 2 5-day leaves to travel out of state for funerals of grandmother and grandfather. Employee is a team leader in several projects which were delayed due to the employee's absence. So I have had managers that have come to me and, they say, well, the person was out on FMLA leave and I know that, mother or father died or a close person died. And I want to ding them because while they were gone, the projects didn't get done. And I'm going to say that FMLA is protected leave. You can't penalize a person for that. Certainly can't take them below standards. And we do certainly give, as a courtesy to employees, not required by law, but a courtesy to employees to recognize funerals of a close relative. So my key thing here to take away is I would be concerned if a manager rates someone below standards because of FMLA leave or bereavement leave. And I would not really reference that in the actual evaluation. I wouldn't say, you know, they took off so much time per FMLA leave. Just kind of block that out, block out the frequent leave, and look at the rest of their time at work. How are they doing in terms of attendance outside of those types of leaves? What about someone who has a long series of one-day absences, mostly on Fridays, Mondays, Fridays, and paydays? Okay, problem here, right? Would everybody agree this, depending on how many days, obviously, this would be below standards. The reason I'm mentioning paydays here, that could be indicative of someone with a substance abuse problem. So it's something I look out about. You can't go up to an employee and say, are you on drugs? But if you notice that behavior, you may look for other signs of impairment. Anybody have any questions or want to talk about their experience dealing with the attendance area?
I want to add one more thing, just again, in summary, protected leaves off the table when it comes to evaluations, which means you're not including anything about a protected leave like a FMLA leave or a leave to do union business. You're not including any of that. All other illness leave outside of the protected leave is open for the evaluation. So for instance, if someone takes 5 days off and then they bring a doctor's note, but that time isn't under a protected leave, that leave can be included. Or if one takes 1 day off and they bring a doctor's note, the doctor's note with the exclusion of a protected leave doesn't protect someone from being marked below standards on the evaluation. Does that make sense? Okay. A lot of people believe that if someone brings a doctor's note, you can't talk to them about an issue with attendance. The only time you cannot is if that leave is considered protected, and you'll know if it's protected because you'll get a notice from somewhere, from Lugina or from HR, that this person's under a protected leave.
Okay. And I'm looking down, I'm out of my office, so I'm using the iPhone for time. I do want to stay on time, and it's saying low battery, so hopefully I'll keep on target here. Okay, thank you, Trishan. I'm sorry, move backwards. How about observing work schedule? So here's some examples. Employee takes lunch breaks at times different than what's reflected on the employee's work schedule. Once again, when does the setting standards start? Way back when that person's hired, or even during the interview, bringing them in. So you have to make sure they know about their schedules, know they're expected to show up to work on time and take their breaks at a specific time. So assuming all that homework has been done, that's something that could be actionable in a evaluation. And I would say it similar to this, you know, that here's their scheduled break, but they're taking it at different times, and this is when we need them to take their lunch break. There's some offices where, let's say it's not a student office where they're dealing with students, and they may not be as concerned about when breaks and lunches are taken. So it's important the employee knows beforehand. The employee arrives 15 minutes late every day, but offers to stay late 15 minutes. Does anybody have a problem with that?
Yeah, it's disruptive to the schedule.
Okay, so there's some offices where that seems to be allowed. I don't like that because I expect to see someone if it's 8 o'clock, they're supposed to be there. So I think that's very important to let people know the first day of work, your start time is 8:30. I expect to see you here at 8:30 every day. I think I saw a couple of people who were saying it's not a problem for their office. If it's not a problem for your office, I think at some point you're going to run into trouble with that. So my recommendation is to stick to the schedule, the written schedule, and if someone wants, and when that departure time comes, they have to leave, and they get docked for the time they missed. Okay. Any questions on that? No. Employee arrives to work every day on time, takes breaks as scheduled, and works a full day every day, exceeds, right? Any questions on work schedule? Okay, let's move on. Understanding duties of the job classification. So we have an example, an employee is not performing her duties, but it argues that she's never been given a copy of her job classification. So is there a problem here? Anybody see a problem?
She should have received it from HR when she was hired.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, dishonesty.
There you go. Touche. I hope they're being dishonest because I'm not sure who said it, but someone said HR, and I'm not sure if the Personnel Commission gives a copy. They may as part of their procedure, but I would recommend as a manager first day on the job, making sure they do have that. And as a manager, you should have a copy too. So if they tell you they never got a job description and they're telling the truth, I would say there's something wrong on our end. Make sure employees have that. Employee is not performing his duties, but claims that his job classification does not reflect his actual duties. He threatens to file a grievance. So anybody, the supervisor employee can go to the Personnel Commission and have them look at the job classification and make sure it reflects their actual duties. They have the right to make that approach. I can't guarantee that they're always going to be able to do an in-depth investigation, but ideally the job description should match or communicate what that person does. It doesn't have to be word for word, line for line, but it should match. It shouldn't be that we're tolerating a job description that doesn't match what the person's expected to do. So if an employee tells me that, I would say, here's your contract with the district, your job description, and but you have the right to, you have concerns, go to the Personnel Commission. And by the way, it's not grievable. It's something that they would handle through their procedures. Any questions on this area before we move on? Hearing none, we'll move on. Following rules and procedures. How about this one? Employee is not following a specific rule, but claims being penalized for a rule that's not in writing. So what's the solution to this? Or why should this never happen? I would say if there's procedures that are controversial, I'd put it in writing. I would make sure these are communicated. If it's an area that may be of concern, put it in writing. You may want to proceed with caution, and I do recommend it. Check with HR, check with us, make sure you're not asking them to do something that violates the contract or is totally different from their job description. But we should communicate things to employees. It doesn't have to be in writing, but it's helpful to have it. I recommend having regular staff meetings if you have a bunch of people in the same job description and going over the expectations for everyone, having an agenda and some role that shows that it was discussed. And you could even say, we talked about it on this date and here's what I gave out at that staff meeting, and you signed and you were there. Any differences on opinion on that or any other ideas on that? Okay. So employee is not following a specific rule, but claims the last supervisor never enforced the rules and they're outdated. What do you think? Do you say, okay, we'll follow the old rules?
No.
Okay. So my suggestion here, once again, this is going back to when they first got to work, or when you first got to work, right? This is a situation where you're the new person as a manager. So when you first get to work, you start talking about your expectations right away. I'm a new manager, here's my expectations, but the other person was different. Well, I'm the manager now. I will certainly listen to your input because you do want their input, but at some point, you have to be ready for things to change. I'm not going to violate your union contract rules. I'm not going to have you do things that are totally outside of your job description. but things may be different from when we had the last supervisor. You're not obligated to follow the same path as that last supervisor. Any questions on this area? Any experience anyone wants to share? Okay, move on to the next one. Completes regular tasks and meets deadlines. So one example here is an employee seems slow in completing tasks, but no specific deadlines were ever set by the supervisor. So the reason I'm giving some areas here where maybe the supervisor could have done things differently is because that should be taken account into our evaluation. So in other words, if you rate someone below standards for not getting something done on time, but you never told them what on time means, that's going to be a concern, right? So here, this first one, I think people need to know, if not specific dates, they should have a general idea. When I hand a student packet, you should be able to complete that on the day you get the student packet, whatever it is. So give deadlines, make sure they're clearly communicated, that they're consistent and fair, and don't consider just taking a long time, whatever that means, as not meeting a deadline. Employee claims that the deadlines are unrealistic, and sometimes it's hard to quantify how long something should take, and that is true. So we need to be fair to employees, we need to be consistent, and we need to be realistic. And I can't give an example for every department. I know that operations, if I'm quoting it right, the APA standards, where someone has, from outside the district in an organization, has come up with standards, how long it should take to clean a toilet, how long it should take to clean a carpet that's this long, and you can use some standard that's objective and not just where you look at something and say, well, it should take you 2 hours. So if there's any way to bring objectivity to the job, that's what works better. Any suggestions on this or any ideas? I mentioned operations. I think that's easier to quantify, but how about for some of the other areas? Any suggestions out there? Or any questions on this? Okay. All right, we'll move on. Group exercise next is establishing effective working relationships. So let's give some examples here. Employee expresses she does not want to participate in birthday or holiday celebrations because she does not have any personal connections with coworkers. I'd like to get some input. What do people think on this? Below, meets, or exceeds?
Meets.
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 Okay. So we can't expect someone to be the party person. I mean, we have to have tolerance for many different personalities. If someone's getting their work done and they don't feel like participating in group activities, that's fine. So they're going to be at least meets with this. They can't take them below standards because they didn't participate. Some people do it's for religious reasons, so we don't want to really pry into their personal lives as to why they're not interested in participating. Okay, number 2, your most trusted employee tells you in confidence that the employee being evaluated has a bad attitude and should not be working in a college environment. What are you going to do with that information when you're doing evaluations? 1144, yeah. Okay, so let me help everybody out a little bit here. So in the evaluation process, you're supposed to evaluate based on what you have personally observed or something that you know. And what I'm going to define know is something where you've investigated and you have enough information to feel confident in making a decision. So if you have a random employee, we have employees that will, 1 or 2 of them will get together or even more and have a petition. They don't like employee such and such, they don't like Michael Hudson, so a few of them get a petition and they leave it on the boss's desk. And does the boss just say, oh, well, someone, I don't know who it is, wrote a note to me and said the person's not up to par, or am I going to investigate? So you get information like that, you would want to make sure you observe that person doing work, get enough information where you feel confident in the information that's being given to you. I have been in situations where someone has broken up with their boyfriend or girlfriend, and then that person calls and says terrible things about that person. That happened back before I was here. I was at LA Unified School District, and that happened at LA Unified, where someone did that, and there was nothing to it, but it was just someone who had a personal conflict outside of the job, and that person tried to get that person fired. So you never know what motivates negative comments that you get like that. So it's better to investigate and not make a decision based on that information without getting knowledge. Okay. Any questions on that? Anyone had experiences or concerns in this area? Okay. Next one. Okay. So here's where I covered some of the ones that I thought were come up a lot in my experiences. How about you all? Any questions in any of these areas? This is the point where you can bring up any question you like about the standards, or if not about the standards, anything about evaluations in general. We did leave a lot of room for questions and also sharing your own experience. Would anybody like to join in now with a comment or a question?
No.
Is that Mark?
Yeah, I don't really have anything to add.
Okay. Okay, let me just ask, I can't see all your faces, but how many people have been managers? I want to say you new managers, but let's say less than a year and a half. How many people have been managers for less than a year and a half? Okay, just get an idea. How many people have been managers? I'm sorry, I clicked the wrong place. How many people have been managers more than 5 years, let's say? Okay. Yeah, some
Oh,
people.
more than 5 years?
Yeah. Okay, we have some folks. So for the folks who are relatively new and maybe have worked somewhere else, is there anyone who has different experiences in the way we're doing evaluations now here? Anybody? Any comments for the new people? Okay. Were there any comments, Mr. Fernandez? No.
Nope, not yet. Quiet crowd today, so.
Yeah, just to know. Just
No. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Shayshan. Thanks.
Not a problem.
This
So,
is Jose in admissions.
hey, Jose, how are you?
Hey, I do have a comment compared to other evaluation forms,
Okay.
and our form compared to our form. It's like there's no in between. Either they exceed expectations, they meet expectations, or they're below expectations.
Okay.
So, and in prior institutions, we had 5 ratings. There was always an in between meets expectations to exceeds expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Simply because, the structure of our form is either they are super clerk, or they are average clerk, or they're below.
Okay.
Good question.
And did you have a system where people were paid more based on how they're rated?
No.
I want to call it, it's called a merit system, but I don't want to use the term we use.
Sure.
There are some
Yeah.
places
No.
Okay.
The pay was not built into the evaluation. You know what I mean? But the evaluation form, and I understand the evaluation form has to be, approved by the associations, and
Right.
there's a long bargaining process. So I'm sure it's a difficult thing to go through. But they'd all agreed, the prior institutions, that there has to be an in-between, because not everyone can be rated, far superior to other compared to their peers.
Okay.
I could tell you, Jose, that I've seen both. I've seen ones with many more areas to evaluate, and I've seen some with less, like LACCD, they only have 2 areas. Either you meet standards or you exceed. I'm sorry, either you're below or you meet or something like that. There's only 2. So it does depend on how the institution negotiates the form itself. But I can tell you that a lot of unions and institutions are trying to get away from the multiple standards and to go into those 3 areas that we currently have now. If ever you're finding an issue with, putting someone into the 3 standards that we have, we should talk. I could also tell you that we're looking at, this was on the table before and we haven't revisited it in a while, but also expanding it to be more qualitative. We find that when evaluation processes are more qualitative, where there's more dialogue and more writing, you are able to place those people where you need to place them, as opposed to it being very precise, where you have to check off a exceeds, a meets, or a below. So if we ever get back on track for making them a little more qualitative, perhaps that'll help you with what you're looking for.
Okay. Thank you.
I would,
Go ahead.
yeah, I would just at Pasadena City College, we had 4 levels, and that, it was kind of confusing because there was exceeds, meets, needs improvement, and then unsatisfactory. So just to me, it's what we have here is a little clearer. You either exceed, you meet, or you don't, and you're below. So it makes it easier to identify metrics that could fall into those categories. When you have more grading levels, then you have to kind of parse up your metrics even further, which is challenging. Just my opinion.
Okay. Okay. So our current contract goes through 2021. So I think your suggestions, let our contract team know, let Treshawn know suggestions. I think we always can use those. But obviously, anything that's negotiated, the idea is 2 sides agree on them. I will share with you this is just my personal view. It's not the right answer here, but my personal view is there should only be 2 standards, and that's below standards or meets, because I'm looking at situations such as the example I gave before, someone who was, let's say, took bereavement leave. They had 3 people who died who's eligible, and it's someone who, when they were gone, there was, everything went wrong because they were so critical at the job. So, but then someone else who didn't have anyone who died can get exceeds. So I actually am in favor of two standards, below standards or meets. But I think, if you feel there should be more standards, I think that kind of argues with our current system that we should make sure we put more comments. I know it makes more work for everyone, but I think the more we can put in terms of comments that give specifics on areas of improvement and specifics on areas where that person shines, I think the better. So that's my view, but I know there's different schools of thought on that. Any other comments before we move on?
I actually do have a really quick question. And so while we're kind of talking about this, we know that the COVID-19 pandemic has kind of caused a lot of disruption in terms of making people switch from one gear to another and then going online and so forth. So when a supervisor is kind of evaluating an employee during this time, how much can you share any advice on how much can we weigh any of it based on the pandemic or their ability to, change so drastically, if that makes sense?
Okay, I have some thoughts, and this is not the right or wrong answer either, but I like to hear everyone else's view. I think the biggest challenge with the COVID is the job descriptions don't necessarily reflect technical savvy, dealing with the Zoom program and everything else associated with us getting online. And that to me has been a concern, more of a concern than a reality, because a lot of employees seem to be, I don't know, maybe they're more tech savvy than me, which is not a surprise at all. But most people are getting it. But my concern was, oh boy, what do we do in situations where people never do understand it? But that to me is the biggest challenge. I think we do have to take that in consideration. We do have to take in consideration people are at home, where frankly, it's a lot harder for me to get work at home because I get interrupted I shouldn't say that out loud. There outside the house, there are interruptions that take me away from work, that don't take place when I'm here. And I am here, by the way, today. So I don't know how to put that in specific suggestions, but I think that's something maybe we could have a little discussion in the last couple of minutes we have here. Any thoughts?
I think that no matter what, it has to be based on the essential duties of the job found in the job description. So you cannot rate someone on anything outside of that, like their internet connection or, their access to technology, things like that, unless that person is someone who should know technology. So you do want to make sure you base it on that first. However, when they're working remotely or we're trying things new, we do have to give them time to adjust and grow and develop, and then also provide them the tools to do it. So if we're providing them the tools to check your emails from home and they're not doing that, then we have the ability to say, we've given you everything that you need, like a computer and internet access. However, you are still not performing the essential duties of your job. So that's the simple answer. Base everything that you do on what are the essential functions of the job per the job description, and whether or not they can perform it, one, and then give a little leeway for the extra stuff that's happening now, the unforeseen circumstances that are happening related to COVID-19.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tricia. I'm going to go to our final slide because we only have, it looks like 3 minutes that are scheduled for the session. Trishan, will you be able to stay on the line afterwards? Okay, Trishan and I and Cyrus is shaking. You're smiling, but are you nodding your head, Cyrus?
Yeah.
Cyrus.
I'm actually a loop. So.
Okay, so all of us will be around after 12 noon. So stick around if don't leave with the questions. Stick around, ask your questions, make sure we answer them. But the last thing that's part of our presentation today is looking at overall work performance rating and when you should rate. Just kind of a textbook answer here is generally look at how many exceeds standards you have and looking at whether to give someone an exceeds standard rating. If most of them are in the meet standards range, you're going to give them a meet standards rating. I think the hard question is, when do you rate someone below standards? So one question is, can one below standard rating equal overall below standards? And before I weigh in, I'd like to get some ideas. If someone has a rating, just one below standard rating, individual rating, is that enough to take them down to overall below standards rating? Any thoughts?
This is Mark. I would think of it just so excessive that maybe, yes.
Okay, that's actually where I was going with it, is maybe, but any other thoughts? So let's say if it's conduct and the person wound up screaming and yelling at a student, but otherwise they're an okay employee. To me, that may be, an example, whereas maybe attendance, well, if they never come to work, never getting, so it possibly could rate below standards. Generally speaking, yeah, it would have to be something severe. I would say in those situations, though, that would be a point where you're definitely working with HR, because if someone is below standards, if they're working with below standards in any area, please give us a call and let us give you some suggestions, because there's no absolute right or answers, right or wrong answers in this question. But it is helpful to get into a discussion on this. Okay. Any other questions in this area in terms of overall work performance rating? Anyone have any questions? Okay. With that, I'm going to remind you once again, we have the Progressive Intervention Series starting next week. Please sign up. We'll have 3 more sessions and hopefully answer all your questions for any employee that needs more correction, less of assurance. I want to thank you all for taking the time, investing in the time to be with us. I know it's challenging, and I hope everyone stays well, and hope to see you next week. And if anyone still has questions, we're going to stick around and answer any questions. Questions or comments? Anybody in the room? Do we see any? Last chance, last chance. Okay. With that, I want to thank everyone once again. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye for now.
This question is just for Cyrus. Cyrus, for next week, is that for everybody?